Dawn broke over Hawthorne Manor with a pale, hesitant glow, as though even the sun feared disturbing the house's long-held sorrows. Mist clung to the rose terraces like a gauzy veil, and the gravel paths glimmered with traces of last night's rain. Clara Meredith stepped from the hired carriage with a small valise held close, her son's hand warm in her own. Though she had rehearsed poise during the rattling ride from town, her breath still faltered at the manor's vast facade. It stood stained and silent, its windows reflecting the morning like polished shields. She reminded herself that a governess must be neither intimidated nor hopeful, only useful, only invisible. The footman directed her toward the gardens, for the Duchess Dowager had insisted on morning tea outdoors, a custom she believed essential for displaying refinement. Clara's heart sank the moment she approached. Every lady wore brilliant silk, shimmering in the mild sun. Lace parasols bloomed like pale flowers above them. Their glances flicked toward Clara's modest gray dress, stitched with careful mending that she prayed no one would notice. Her son clutched her skate, shrinking behind her as whispers drifted toward them, soft as feathers, sharp as pins. Clara dipped a respectful curtsy, her cheeks warming despite her resolve to remain unaffected. "You are late," the dowager remarked, her tone so smooth it seemed polished. She examined Clara with a glance that catalogued deficiencies more swiftly than words could. "I had hoped punctuality might be the first virtue a governess learned." The surrounding ladies smiled thinly, sipping their tea as though tasting scandal. Clara apologized gently, offering no explanation, for she had learned long ago that truth mattered little beside perception. Her son pressed closer, sensing the quiet hostility that rolled through the perfumed air like an unwelcome draught. Lady Ashcombe leaned toward the dowager, not quite whispering. "One must admire the courage of a woman who arrives with so very little and stands as though she belongs." A ripple of laughter stirred the parasols. Clara kept her eyes lowered, though inside she felt a tightening, a small coil of pride resisting humiliation. She had entered households before where poverty made her a curiosity, but the cruelty here was notable for how elegantly it was delivered. She thought of her late husband's debts, still half-whispered in town, and prayed today would not mark the beginning of new rumors. A few steps away, the Duke of Winthrop sat alone on a wrought iron bench, half hidden by climbing ivy. Clara had expected his presence to dominate the gathering, yet he seemed almost swallowed by the garden's vastness. He wore a dark tailcoat that contrasted starkly with the white roses around him, and his posture, slightly bent, shoulders drawn inward, struck her with quiet surprise. A man of such rank ought to radiate authority. Instead, he appeared as though bearing a private weight that bowed him more effectively than any public expectation. As Clara observed from the corner of her eye, he lifted a hand to his face with an abruptness that betrayed emotion rather than discretion. A letter trembled between his fingers, creased from repeated handling. Clara recognized the gesture, the slow collapse of a resolve maintained too long. She turned away quickly, but her son had already noticed. The boy's brows knitted in concern, and before Clara could stop him, he slipped from her grasp and crossed the garden with earnest determination. Gasps fluttered from the ladies, who leaned forward like spectators in a cruel theater. The Duke lowered his hand, startled, as the child approached and laid a small palm against his knee, a gesture so innocent it pierced the morning's brittle elegance. "Sir," the boy said softly, "please don't cry." The Duke blinked, frozen, as though a ghost had touched him. "You can have my mamma," the boy added, with all the generosity of a child who believed every sorrow could be mended by love. A hush fell, broken only by the delicate clink of a teacup dropped onto its saucer. Clara rushed forward, mortified, her voice catching as she apologized. Her son looked up at her, confused by the alarm around him, unaware he had crossed an invisible boundary stricter than any hedge or gate. The Duke rose slowly, his expression unreadable yet undeniably altered. The garden seemed to hold its breath as he regarded Clara. "There is no offense," he said, his voice steadier than his eyes. "A child speaks with a clarity we have long forgotten." His gaze lingered on her for a fleeting moment, one that felt too intimate, too revealing, before turning back to the boy with a gentleness Clara had not expected. But the silence that followed was thick with judgment. The dowager's lips pressed into a pale line, her disappointment radiating like a chill breeze. Clara gathered her son close, wishing she could shield him from the weight of adult scrutiny. Every instinct urged her to flee, yet her position required composure. She met the Duke's gaze briefly, offering a respectful nod that concealed the turmoil rising within her. To her astonishment, he seemed on the verge of speaking again, but the dowager cleared her throat with pointed authority. The moment fractured instantly. The Duke stepped back, folding the letter and slipping it into his coat with the deliberate care of someone hiding pain beneath practiced dignity. Tea resumed, yet the atmosphere had soured unmistakably. The ladies conversed with renewed vigor, their fans fluttering like wings stirred by the scent of scandal. Clara stood apart, her son tucked at her side, feeling as though every whisper bore her name. She tried focusing on the roses, how their petals caught light like silk. But her thoughts circled the Duke, the letter, the grief he had tried so hard to contain. She wondered whether she had glimpsed a truth never meant for witnesses, and whether that alone would condemn her in this unforgiving world. The boy tugged her sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "did I do wrong?" Clara knelt and kissed his temple, assuring him softly that kindness was never wrong. Yet inside she feared the consequences. A governess was expected to remain unnoticed, to slip between the household's needs like a shadow. What her son had done, drawing the Duke's sorrow into daylight, might be an offense no apology could smooth away. She straightened slowly, scanning the garden once more. The Duke had resumed his seat, but his gaze was fixed on the earth, as though he searched for something he had dropped long ago and feared he would never find again. Clara wished she could retreat, wished the morning's humiliation might be forgotten by lunch. But as she prepared to guide her son toward the waiting steward, a soft rustle drew her attention. The Duke had lifted his head. Their eyes met across the rose beds, his unexpectedly bright, hers unwillingly vulnerable. For a heartbeat, the garden narrowed to that single exchange. And then, before either could look away, a breeze swept through, carrying with it the dowager's cold pronouncement. "This household cannot endure disruptions, however innocent they may appear." Clara lowered her gaze and curtsied once more, yet in her chest something shifted, not resignation, but a quiet ember of defiance. She took her son's hand and turned toward the manor, unaware that behind her, the Duke remained standing long after she had disappeared from sight. He pressed a hand to his coat where the letter lay hidden, and in the stillness of that moment, the entire garden acknowledged an unspoken truth. Nothing that had happened would be forgotten. The days that followed unfolded with the delicate tension of a violin string drawn too tight, each moment carrying a quiet tremor beneath its polished surface. Clara moved through the corridors of Hawthorne Manor with measured grace, determined to erase any trace of the garden incident. Yet the walls themselves seemed to hold memory. Every footman's glance felt a shade too curious. Every maid's whisper ceased a heartbeat too late. Her son, blissfully unaware, adapted quickly to the manor's rhythms, darting ahead with the bright eagerness of a child who sensed possibilities rather than danger. Clara, however, sensed danger everywhere. The Duke, despite his initial reserve, appeared at the edges of her days with increasing frequency. She found him observing the tutor's lessons from the doorframe, lingering at the threshold of the music room as she coaxed hesitant notes from the pianoforte for her pupil's benefit. He never interrupted, never presumed. Yet there was an unmistakable searching in his gaze, an unspoken question suspended between them like dust motes in late afternoon light. Clara told herself it was imagination, nothing more. A governess could not afford fantasies, especially not those that involved a man still learning how to live with grief. One evening, after placing her son in bed and extinguishing the candle, she discovered a slender volume nestled atop her own pillow. It was bound in emerald leather, worn at the corners, as though cherished by a hand that handled treasures gently. When she opened it, a pressed white rose rested between the pages, its petals ghostly soft. A single line of verse adorned the margin in a firm, elegant hand. Asterisk where silence grows, the heart still listens. Asterisk. Clara's breath caught. No signature was needed. She closed the book swiftly, pressing it to her chest for a moment before tucking it deep inside her valise, as though the very air might betray her possession of it. The gift was beautiful, dangerously so. It felt less like a token and more like a confession made without words, one that threatened the fragile equilibrium she had worked so hard to maintain. The next morning, the consequences began their quiet bloom. Lady Ashcombe, whose appetite for intrigue could rival any court gossip, discovered Clara in the corridor outside the schoolroom. Her smile resembled a jeweled brooch, hard, sparkling, and entirely for display. "My dear Miss Meredith," she purred, "I trust you are settling well?" The manner can be intimidating for those unaccustomed to its expectations. Clara offered a polite nod. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, madam." Indeed, opportunities have a way of multiplying, do they not? Lady Ashcombe's gaze dipped deliberately to the folded hem of Clara's sleeve where a faint trace of rose scent clung from the book she had touched earlier. One must be cautious. Appearances, after all, are rather fragile. Clara held her composure, though her pulse throbbed beneath her collar. She wanted to deny the insinuation, but denial itself fed the rumor's hunger. Lady Ashcombe departed with a silky flourish, leaving behind the chilling certainty that Clara had become the day's preferred subject. By mid-afternoon, the servants' corridors hummed with a subdued flurry of murmurs. Clara caught fragments, arose, in her room, his handwriting, before each speaker dissolved into feigned duty upon noticing her presence. Shame flushed her skin, not because the whispers were entirely false, but because the truth they misinterpreted was far more complicated than scandal allowed. She had not sought the Duke's attention, yet she had felt the tremor of something awakening within her when she held his understated gift. Her attempt to continue with the day unraveled when the tutor arrived late and flustered, offering apologies for an unexpected discussion with the Duchess Dowager. Clara did not need details to understand. The Dowager's scrutiny, sharpened by years of guarding the family's reputation, would eventually settle where gossip pointed. As she guided her young pupil through his lessons, Clara fought to keep the tremor from her voice. The boy sensed her unease as surely as he sensed weather before rain. "Mamma," he whispered when the tutor stepped out, "have I done something wrong again?" Her heart twisted. "No, my darling," she murmured, smoothing his hair. "You have only ever been good." But he looked unconvinced, his eyes dimmed by the memory of the garden scene. Clara swallowed the ache rising in her throat. The truth she could not speak was that his innocent compassion had warped into a weapon in society's hands. That evening, while escorting the boy to the music room, Clara found herself intercepted by the Duke. He appeared unexpectedly at the foot of the staircase, his expression composed yet carrying a strain beneath the surface. "Miss Meredith," he said, inclining his head with a courtesy that surprised her. "Might I have a moment?" Her heart stumbled. She dismissed her son into the tutor's care before turning back to him. "Of course, Your Grace." He hesitated, as though weighing each word. "I had hoped to express my gratitude for your patience these past days. The household owes you more courtesy than it has shown." Clara clasped her hands to steady herself. "You owe me nothing, sir. A governess's trials are hardly worthy of your concern." "On the contrary," he replied softly, "you have brought warmth into rooms that have known only shadows." His voice dipped lower, and Clara felt her breath falter. I fear my gesture was ill-timed. His eyes searched hers, earnest and unguarded. "If it has caused you distress, I must apologize." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her, and she found herself speaking before caution could intervene. "It was not the gift that unsettled me, Your Grace. Only the consequences others imagine from it." A flicker of guilt passed through his features. "I will address the matter." Before she could respond, a cluster of ladies swept into the foyer like a sudden tide of silken perfume, their chatter halting as they noticed the Duke standing so near to the governess. Lady Ashcombe's triumphant smirk told Clara all she needed to know. The rumor had become a spectacle. The Duke's jaw tightened, though his voice remained controlled. "Good evening, ladies." His tone held the cool edge of a man interrupting a petty performance. He gestured toward Clara with unflinching composure. "Miss Meredith has my full esteem. Any implication otherwise is born of folly." If he had aimed to dispel gossip, the opposite occurred. The ladies exchanged glances heavy with intrigue, their fans fluttering like restless wings. Clara's cheeks burned with mortification, not from his defense, but because such defense only deepened the scandal's allure. As the crowd dispersed, Clara turned away, her vision blurred with shame she could neither voice nor evade. She hastened toward the corridor, but something on the console table halted her steps, a folded parchment bearing her name in the Duke's unmistakable script. It lay partially concealed beneath a candlestick, as though placed for her eyes alone. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was not a message, but a sketch, precise, gentle strokes forming her profile as she read to her son beneath the window's light. The drawing captured a serenity she did not know she possessed. Her breath shivered in her chest. This was no misunderstanding. This was sentiment laid bare by a man who had spent years locking his heart away. And though the house around her hummed with malice, Clara understood, with sudden certainty, that she stood at the threshold of something far more perilous than scandal. Rain swept across Hawthorne Manor that evening in silver sheets, turning the conservatory's glass walls into trembling mirrors. Clara had ushered her son to bed and lingered only long enough to ensure he slept soundly before retreating to the quietest room she knew. She often escaped to the conservatory when the household's whispers pressed too hard, for the scent of damp earth and the soft rustle of leaves calmed her in ways no polite drawing-room ever could. Tonight, however, a storm prowled along the panes, and she felt its reflection in her own restless pulse. She longed for solitude, yet the solitude she found unsettled rather than soothed. The Duke's sketch, still hidden beneath her bodice, warmed her skin like an unspoken vow she had never agreed to carry. She paced between potted palms, trying to breathe evenly. The rumor had grown monstrous within a single day. Even the tutor had spoken with unusual stiffness, as though afraid proximity alone might implicate him in some imagined impropriety. Clara pressed a hand to her forehead. She had done nothing wrong, yet shame clung to her like a damp cloak. Her son had noticed her unease and watched her with quiet worry, though he murmured no questions. The boy's gentleness sharpened her dread. Children paid the price for adult cruelty far more often than anyone admitted. A sudden gust rattled the conservatory door. Clara startled, turning toward the shadowed entrance. The Duke stood there, rainwater glittering in his dark hair, his breath faintly visible in the chilled air. His presence filled the room with an immediacy that made Clara's pulse leap. She had not expected him, certainly not here, not tonight, and for a moment neither spoke, as though words themselves were too fragile to risk. "I feared you might be unwell," he said quietly, stepping inside. The storm roared at his back before he closed the door with deliberate care. "The tutor mentioned you seemed distressed." Clara folded her hands to still their trembling. "I regret causing concern, Your Grace." His brows knit. "Do not stand on formality with me tonight. Not after all that has transpired." He moved closer, careful yet unmistakably earnest, and the lamplight caught the weariness in his eyes. "I cannot allow these rumors to continue unchallenged. You deserve peace, not persecution." Clara exhaled shakily. "Peace is rarely afforded to women in my position. A single misplaced kindness becomes evidence of ambition. A single kindness received becomes accusation." The Duke's jaw tightened. "If my actions have worsened your burden, I must answer for them." He hesitated, searching her face. "But I will not pretend I regret them." Clara's breath faltered. Rain drummed against the glass with increasing fervor, creating a cocoon of sound that made the world beyond feel impossibly distant. "You should regret them," she whispered. "Not for my sake, but for yours. Your household needs stability, not scandal." "Stability," he repeated softly, as though tasting the word and finding it bitter. "I have lived in stability for years. It has been nothing but polite emptiness." He stepped closer, the stormlight casting his features in stark relief. "You awakened something in this house, something I had forgotten existed." Clara felt the conservatory shrink around them. She looked away, but he gently lifted her chin with 2 fingers, an audacious gesture softened by reverence. "Miss Meredith," he murmured, "you must know I would never compromise your dignity." Her voice trembled despite her efforts. And yet you have, without meaning to. She lowered her gaze again, struggling to steady herself. The sketch, the rose, your defense in the foyer. Each kindness becomes another stone in the wall society is building around us. He drew back only slightly, the rejection landing with visible force. But rather than retreat, he clasped his hands behind his back, as though anchoring himself. Then allow me to speak plainly, for once. His voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. I have been a widower for 3 years. In that time, I have felt nothing but the echo of loss. Until, he stopped, breath-catching. Until I saw you comfort your son in the garden. Until I saw the gentleness with which you restored light to his days. Until I heard your voice carry hope into rooms that had forgotten the sound. Clara pressed a hand to her chest. Your Grace, you must not say such things. But they are true, he answered, almost fiercely. And truth, however dangerous, must be named. The storm intensified, lightning flashing across the glass. For a moment the conservatory was illuminated in brilliant white, and Clara saw the raw vulnerability in his expression, an emotion too human, too naked for a man of his station to reveal lightly. It frightened her with its sincerity. Do you believe me blind to the consequences? He asked. I know precisely what is at risk. But silence has cost me more than any rumor ever could. I will not cloak my heart in fear any longer. Clara stepped back, pressing against the cool frame of a palm planter. Her thoughts raced. I cannot be the cause of further grief for your household. The dowager already sees me as a threat. My mother sees ghosts, he replied. She clings to tradition as though it might resurrect the past. But his voice broke, startling them both. He turned away, bracing a hand against the fog glass. I never mourned properly. I buried myself in duty, believing numbness was survival. Yet numbness is merely another form of death. Clara felt something inside her shift, pity, compassion, and something warmer she dared not name. She approached slowly, placing her fingertips beside his hand on the pane, not touching him but near enough that her warmth might reach him. You grieve because you loved, she said softly. There's no shame in that. He angled his face toward her, and the anguish there was unmistakable. And what of the shame I feel now, he whispered, for wanting something new, something I fear I have no right to desire. Her breath quickened. She knew. He did not speak the word, her name, but she felt it reverberate between them. Still she shook her head. Your Grace, desire cannot rewrite station. I am a governess. And you? I am a man, he said, interrupting gently, before I am anything else. The simplicity of the statement unsteadied her more than any declaration might have. Thunder rumbled overhead, the floor trembling faintly. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering courage she scarcely possessed. We cannot allow this, she whispered. Even speaking of it invites ruin. A long silence followed. When she finally looked at him, he appeared almost defeated, yet not resigned. Something resolute glimmered beneath his sorrow, an ember refusing to die. Clara, he said, and the sound of her name spoken without title unraveled her composure more completely than any touch could have. Should I remain silent, I shall lose what little heart I have left. Before she could answer, a shadow crossed the fog glass, someone approaching the conservatory doors. The handle rattled once, then stilled. Clara stepped back instinctively, pulse hammering, but the Duke's expression hardened into something fierce and unyielding. Then the time for silence, he murmured, barely audible over the storm, may already be over. Morning crept over Hawthorne Manor with a deceptive gentleness, its pale gold light slipping across marble floors as though nothing in the world were amiss. Yet Clara awoke with a heaviness that made rising feel like stepping into deep water. The storm of the previous night had left the grounds glittering, but within the house, tension lingered in the stillness. She dressed quietly, her hands unsteady as she fastened each button, aware that the conservatory encounter had shifted something irreversible between herself and the Duke. When she descended to the schoolroom, the atmosphere was already charged. Servants moved with nervous precision, their glances sharp and fleeting. Clara sensed that the whispering had deepened into something heavier, something shaped by authority rather than idle tongues. The dowager had taken control of the narrative. Clara could feel it like a cold draft beneath every closed door. Even the tutor greeted her with a strained bow, as though unsure whether acknowledging her might be construed as complicity. Her son sat at the desk with his slate, smiling up at her with innocent relief. That small smile fortified her. She helped him through arithmetic while the tutor oversaw the Duke's correspondence from the adjoining room. Yet Clara's mind wandered. She replayed the Duke's words from the stormlit conservatory, raw, vulnerable, unguarded. He had spoken to her not as a distant nobleman, but as a man who had finally reached the limits of his loneliness. His voice had trembled when he said her name. She had carried that tremble with her into sleep. Before the lesson could conclude, a stiff knock sounded at the schoolroom door. The dowager entered, her posture regal, her expression carved with frost. "Miss Meredith," she said, her voice perfectly even, "you will accompany me." Clara rose, smoothing her skirts, careful not to show her shaking. Her son reached for her hand, but she gave him a reassuring nod before following the dowager into the corridor. They walked in silence until they reached the grand ballroom, empty, echoing, lit by a cascade of morning sun. Clara felt small in the vastness of it, as though every step she took announced her inadequacy. The dowager turned sharply. "Your conduct has invited disgrace upon this household," she declared. "A governess is meant to preserve decorum, not disrupt it with emotional entanglements." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but the dowager raised a hand. "The whispers are intolerable. You are to be dismissed." The word struck like a blow. Clara steadied herself. "I have committed no impropriety," she said, though her voice wavered. "I have been devoted to my duties and to your grandson's well-being. Surely you must see that." "What I see," the dowager replied coolly, "is a woman who has allowed herself to become a subject of interest to a grieving man too vulnerable to recognize folly. I will not permit my son to be manipulated by sentiment." Before Clara could respond, the ballroom doors opened behind them, and the Duke strode in with purposeful steps that echoed against the polished floor. "Mother," he said, his tone firm, "you will not speak another word." The dowager stiffened, but he moved past her without pause, turning his full attention to Clara. "Miss Meredith," he said, softer, "forgive me. I did not know she intended this." Clara swallowed the surge of emotion rising in her chest. "Your Grace, I should not be the cause of discord within your family." "You are not the cause," he insisted. "Rumor is, fears, and I will not allow either to dictate the truth." He drew closer, the sunlight catching in his dark hair, warming the grief-shadowed features she knew so well. "You deserve better than whispers. You deserve honesty." The dowager stepped forward, outrage sharpening her words. "You forget yourself. You forget your duty." "I remember it perfectly," he replied without looking at her. His eyes remained fixed on Clara, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I remember that duty means protecting what gives life meaning. I remember that I have spent years hiding in silence. And I remember that when I look at her," his voice softened, "I feel alive." Clara's breath caught, the declaration striking deeper than she wished to admit. Never had she imagined hearing such words directed at her, words weighted with sincerity, spoken in a room designed for grand moments. Yet she could not allow them to stand unchallenged. "Your Grace," she managed, "affection between us invites ruin. Not only for me, but for your son, for your household, even for your own name. I cannot be the reason you fall from favor." He shook his head, frustration and longing warring in his expression. "You are not listening. You are not ruin. You are restoration." His voice lowered. "I'm undone without you." Emotions surged through her, fierce and terrifying. She stepped back, needing space to breathe. "You speak of restoration, but I know the cost of attachment across stations. People will not forgive this. They will not forgive me. And your mother?" "My mother clings to the past," he interrupted. "I will not spend my life appeasing grief." The dowager's eyes flashed with wounded pride, yet she remained silent, her authority slipping like sand through her fingers. Clara closed her eyes briefly, forcing steadiness into her voice. Your Grace, I cannot accept your declaration, not while it threatens everything you have built. His shoulders slumped, a rare break in his composure. So you would rather leave? Clara felt the words strike with painful accuracy. She had not wanted to admit it, yet the dowager's dismissal had already decided the matter. If my presence endangers your household, then yes, I must go. Her voice quavered. For your sake, and my son's. The Duke seemed to pale, disbelief hardening into grief. You would vanish from this house without allowing me any recourse. Recourse, she whispered, would only make the scandal deeper. A profound stillness settled between them, the ballroom's vastness amplifying the ache of unsaid truths. Finally he spoke, each word strained. If you walk away, you take with you the only light this house has seen in years. She felt tears burn, but she held her chin high. Some lights are too dangerous to keep. The dowager exhaled slowly, triumphant yet uneasy. Clara bowed her head to both of them and turned toward the door, every step weighted with sorrow. When she reached the threshold, she paused, not to reconsider, but to steady her heart. Beyond the doorway, the tutor waited, pale and breathless. Miss Meredith, he whispered urgently, forgive the intrusion. I thought you should know. Preparations are already being made. A carriage has been ordered for dawn. Clara's pulse faltered, and behind her, the Duke's sharp intake of breath cut the air like a blade. The carriage ordered for dawn became the silent drumbeat beneath every hour of that restless night, echoing through Clara's thoughts like a warning she could neither silence nor obey. She had packed only necessities, leaving behind the small tokens her son had given her during quieter months, unwilling to burden him with the weight of her departure before she could explain. The moon spilled a cold wash of silver across the corridors as she moved through them, knowing each familiar shadow might. The Duke had not sought her again after the confrontation in the ballroom, though she sensed him everywhere, behind every closed door, beneath each wavering candle, in the ache she carried in her ribs. She wondered whether he had chosen distance out of duty or despair. The uncertainty made sleep impossible. She spent most of the night sitting beside her son, watching him sleep peacefully, unaware that the ground beneath his world was shifting. When dawn's first light pressed against the curtains, Clara rose and brushed a trembling hand through her son's hair. He stared, eyes fluttering open with confusion. "Mama, why are you dressed?" he whispered. She swallowed. "We may need to leave the manor for a while." Fear flickered across his face, quickly chased by trust. "If you go, I go," he said simply. Her chest tightened, and she embraced him, willing herself not to break. "We will be all right," she murmured, though she was far from certain. A knock sounded. The tutor's voice came through softly. "Miss Meredith, the carriage is waiting." Clara kissed her son's forehead and took his hand, her bag over her shoulder. They descended the grand staircase, every step feeling like a farewell to a life she had dared to hope for. Outside, the carriage stood veiled in morning mist. The dowager was nowhere to be seen, yet Clara could feel her influence in the cold air. The driver bowed stiffly, then opened the door. Before Clara could help her son inside, a voice broke across the courtyard. "Don't touch that door." The Duke strode forward, breathless, determination etched across his features as though he had sprinted from the far wing of the estate. Clara froze, torn between relief and dread. Her son squeezed her hand, sensing the storm gathering. The Duke stopped before her, chest rising with unsteady breaths. "You cannot leave," he said, his voice rawer than she had ever heard it. Clara forced steadiness. "Your Grace, the household cannot weather the scandal of my presence. You know this." "I know what I am willing to lose," he replied, "and you are not among those things." "The dowager disagrees," she said quietly. "My mother's grief has ruled this house for too long," he answered. "I will not let it claim you." She shook her head. "It is not about her. It is about the world beyond these gates. They will not understand." "They do not need to understand," he insisted. "They need only witness my choice." Her breath trembled. "And what is that choice?" He stepped closer. "You, and the child who deserves to grow in a home not shaped by fear or silence." Her son looked up at him, eyes wide with hope that Clara had tried to keep contained. The Duke knelt to him. "You are part of this family as long as you wish to be," he said. Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "You cannot promise that without cost." "I can," he replied, rising, "because some costs are worth paying." The dowager's voice cut through the courtyard like a blade. "You forget yourself again." She stood in the archway, posture rigid, fury simmering beneath every controlled step she took. "You would shatter our name for this woman." The Duke did not turn toward her. "I would salvage my life for her." Clara's voice cracked. "Please do not fight because of me." He met her gaze. "This is not a fight. This is truth." The dowager advanced, but her authority wavered. "If you defy me, you will stand alone." "I have been alone for years," he said softly. "Now I choose not to be." Silence settled, heavy as stone. The dowager's face shifted, not softening, but breaking. She turned away without another word, retreating into the shadows of the manor. Clara felt the world tilt. "You have severed something essential," she whispered. "I have freed something essential," he corrected. The driver waited, uncertain, reins trembling in his hands. Clara looked from the carriage to the Duke, then to her son. "I do not know if I am brave enough for the life you offer." "Then let me be brave for both of us," he said. She exhaled a shuddering breath. "If I stay, it will change everything." "Yes," he said. "That is the point." Her son tugged her sleeve. "Mama, can we stay?" The simplicity of the question pierced her. Clara nodded slowly, turning fully to the Duke. "Then I stay. But we must rebuild carefully." Relief washed across his face, fierce and tender. "Together," he said. His hand brushed hers, hesitant, reverent, as though afraid the moment might dissolve. Before she could speak again, a thunderous crash echoed from within the manor, followed by the dowager's startled cry. The Duke's expression hardened. That came from the west wing. Clara's heart raced. What happened? The tutor stepped back, pale. Someone has opened the sealed room." Clara's breath caught. The sealed room, the one that had remained locked since the duchess's death. The Duke moved toward the manor, every line of his body taut. "Stay here," he ordered. But Clara shook her head. "Not this time. Whatever waits inside, we face it together." He hesitated only a moment, then offered his hand. She took it. They crossed the threshold side by side as the first true sunlight broke over the estate. And somewhere deep in the house, something stirred. Its presence felt like a breath drawn after years of silence, fragile yet undeniable. It beckoned them forward without mercy to learn.